Good morning, everybody. First, I would like to say thank you that I'm here and we are together. According to today's reality, I decided to talk about everything in Georgian language.
Let me once again welcome you, and once again, thank you very much for today, for these two crucially important days of us standing together, of us talking crisis, talking communication, uh, talking about importance of communication in those hard times that we witness outside and events ongoing in our country. I'm representing the Union of Museums, and our today's topic of discussion is protection of democracy. When I was preparing myself for this speech, it was crucially important to reflect the realities that I was seeing outside. It was very important and especially interesting to think about communication and communication in times of crisis, especially for our museums. But in the recent days, following many discussions and many debates I had the chance to participate in, I could change my presentation. But in any case, till the very morning, I didn't know what I was going to talk about to you. Not because I didn't know what I wanted to talk about, but I didn't know what kind of morning it would be. And will I still have a chance to stand in front of you in my capacity of the director of the museum and representative of the museum Union of Museums? I'm still standing here, and hopefully I can tell you a story what kind of institutional change these museums in Georgia have undergone. All of us know what museums are. All of us know what we want museums to be, but quite frequently we overlook what kind of museums should memorial museums be, who are placed in certain kind of brackets, which are placed in certain kind of form, and they need to retain this memory and follow certain chronology. Before moving on to memorial museums, let me think back to the times when the Union of Tbilisi Museums was being established. I was not engaged in its establishment back then, so I'm the first director of this union. And one of the most important things about museums, about Union of Museums, is the fact that it's a union of 9 museums. Some of them are older than 20 years of age. Some of them have been around for more than 40 years, even. And we should not forget the endeavors of original founders, original leaders and managers of those museums who collected and preserved their collections for us, following the beliefs of the time. At the brink of the centuries, when we were discussing museums in Georgia, considering their role to serve as a bridge, as something that will help us to build the gap between the past and the future, between different fragmented layers of society, we were imagining context of Union of Museums of Tbilisi as just just a link, just a bridge to span this abyss, like expression of hope, retaining the memory of people whom we need to remember, but taking into account the political reality and context of the country. There is no memorized person, there is no individuum that would have been outside the time, outside the reality, outside the political and geographical realities of his own or her own time. And almost every decision that we are making along the way of our life, that we find ourselves in, and leads whatever we internally believe in. Since 2018, when we were just starting discussions as how should the Union of Museums look like, one of the main points that we were trying to make is to represent memory, to create safe space for preserving of our collections, to pass them down the generations. But one of the most important important point for us was to rely on museum histories, memorize people as a source of lessons to be drawn for current application and future application. And I'm free in talking about it because I'm given this liberty by the names behind the museums that are enjoined by this Union of Museums. Apart from 9 museums named after memorable people to whom they are dedicated, we've got also the Museum of Puppets and Toys, established back in 1936, one of the hardest and most tragic periods in Georgian history in 20th century. So I do have a honor to be representing Ilia Chavchavadze and Merav Koslava museums. At the same time, I've got responsibility to be sharing in each and every values that they were fighting for in the struggle towards independence of Georgia and human rights. Today we are at the change of the tide. It's a breaking point in Georgian history, maybe again. And people who are working in Georgian museums, some of them are young. They were born after 9th of April 1989, when Georgia was fighting for freedom and independence from Soviet Union, to break free from the Soviet Empire. Today we are standing and facing the same challenge. We are fighting for freedom of expression, for freedom of association. Maybe it sounds late to be talking about it as a democratic value in the end of the first quarter of 21st century, because back in 19th century, Ilia Chavchavadze and many others were fighting for just that, for national values that we tend to call European values today. Those national values that incorporated human rights, women's rights, voting rights, rights to be educated, and many, many others, which are considered basic and fundamental in the 21st century, and yet we are here to protect them because they are being violated. About justice, about fair play, about everything that used to bring people together in highly polarized society. When we are talking, when we are mentioning Ilia Chavchavadze's heritage, you probably won't find a single person in Georgia who would not be able to talk about the importance of Ilia Chavchavadze's figure and do so extensively. But within the space of our museum, we can demonstrate not only his greatness, and actually I would like to remind you that Ilia Chavchavadze was honored as a saint by Georgian Orthodox Church. We are trying to shed light on his figure as a reformer, as a statesman. And this museum quite often is being perceived as a museum dedicated to a literary figure, to a writer. But it was much more than that. It was the focal point of 19th century Georgia and those activities which were actually crowned with independence later on. Activism of 19th century. What kind of activists it might have been and what kind of communication systems might they have been relying upon? Imagine when we probably it's very, very hard to imagine when the only means of communication is telegraph and newspaper, when this is the most modern cutting edge technology and Georgia is following step by step those advancements that are taking place in Europe as well. One of the main gains of this period were women's rights. When following declaration of Georgian independence in 1918, we already had 5 elected members of the parliament, female members of the parliament. And it was thanks to all the endeavors carried out in the 19th century, actually. So going back to Union of Tbilisi Museums, one of the main missions that we were trying to pursue is to create the educational space, to create the communication space, because memorial museums are quite often associated with public schools and no more. They used to just follow the curricula of public schools, secondary schools, and were only representing something related to the birthplace, birth date, death place, death date, and that's it. That's why we immediately struggled with certain challenges at the very outset. We were criticized from all sides. Quite an interesting experience in overcoming these hurdles and obstacles in the course of 8 years. But the main achievement that I can put forward now is bringing to the fore some historic knowledge, spreading the knowledge that people working in museums did work, but nobody else might have known about it because they did have this extensive and very vast experience that they could pass to the society at large and also people arriving at museums, newly hired museum workers. And it seems to me like we did a good job of it. Looking back, I can say that we did. And the recent fortnight's experience probably shedding some additional light on this from a different angle, but let me use this chance to offer my special thanks to each and every member of my team, because we shared the belief that we could make our voice heard in the society where nobody believed that memorial museums could have played any role. It was very hard to convince the funders, the state, the non-government organizations, the legal institutions, and everybody else that memorial museums do have an opportunity and do have a good chance to be one of the main actors in the field of museum work. For instance, it took us 3 years to convince a penitentiary service that museums can do some good deeds in penitentiary institutions, that museums can serve as a beacon of hope and serve as an example in an enclosed spaces. And it took us 3 years to achieve this, but nowadays we are entering the prisons once a month for juvenile prisons, and we are sharing with these young inmates different educational materials. And actually, we can boast of their socialization. They are coming back to museums. Having been released, they are coming back to museums. And it's nothing outstanding. It's nothing new for the museums worldwide, but it was very hardly achievable for us here in Georgia. It was very hard to break the walls of this enclosed space where being imprisoned is a stigma, where serving your time is a final seal on your future development. But we do have some voice. We museums do have the voice to shake these beliefs, to bring these stigmas down. One of the examples of that is one of the museums that I want to talk about, Ilia Chavchavadze Museum. And our exhibition concept in the course of rehabilitation of this museum was from the person to the state, the story of a single man and state experience reflected in his personal story. The main tasks that he was pursuing, establishment of state. In 2016, when we were starting renovation of the museum, when we started thinking about this renovation work, it was very hard to imagine what kind of museum might have we got at our hands by the end of the work. And the reason for that were the changes that this house, originally built in 19th century, has undergone in the course of the 20th century. Following the murder of Ilia Chavchavadze, this house used to be inhabited by different people, by different institutions, even till the end of the 1970s, till the beginning of 1980s, when the new museum is being established in the Soviet context, but with less attention being paid to restoration of authenticity of authentic spaces within the house. That's why it was important task for us, not only to ensure authenticity of this house and reestablish this authenticity, but also to reflect the feeling of the era. At the same time, ensuring safety of the visitor and comfort of the visitor. To change the practice of mandatorily guided tours, to create a space where the visitor would be free to move around and enjoy the experience on their own. And one of the main tasks as well was to represent the age, to demonstrate its main characteristics that might have been inspirational for anybody turning up at the museum, for any visitor entering the house, to believe that there is a place in the museum for them as well. We've got three separate projects that I was initially going to elaborate upon. One of them is Museum Outside of a Museum project that we initiated even before we started the renovation work at the Chavchavadze Museum. And we managed in many corners of the country, including rural areas along the occupational line, that we managed to carry it around the country. When the museums are coming out of museum spaces and no longer wait for the visitors to turn up, but quite to the contrary, going home to the visitors, visiting them. When we are talking about the role of the museums, it's in our country at the very least, it's very important to mention that museums might serve as attraction points for tourism. They're important for tourism. Yes, they are. And for touristic and cultural processes, but I am still of the mind that memorial museums are even more important for locals. To share with them the history lessons, to teach them something about the past, to give them the opportunities to learn what kind of values we might have had and lost, what kind of values we might strive to restore and win back. One of the main tasks for the Union of Museums in the course of its outside space museums, apart from its traditional museum work, like exhibitions, visitors, and things like that. You might observe the statistics on the screen, which, for the small country of our kind, in the course of the 3-year period, especially given the outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic, are quite impressive, especially against the background of the resources that we had at our disposal. The educational program for penitentiary institutions, 600 something activities in the border areas and other corners of the country. Certain amount of visitors that I missed, but you might observe it on the screen. I can see it because it's blocked by people's heads from me. Sorry about it. So many people, so many adolescents engaged in our educational programs in penitentiary institutions. We are trying our best not to overlook any crucial moment in the history of Georgia. Deciding pivotal moments that are still current, that are still pressing. 1937, the harsh violation of human rights. Fight for human rights, freedom of expression, a voice that should be heard, voice that we need now, and especially showing the rehabilitation process itself. Nowadays, going into a museum, seeing how shiny it might be, you still can imagine how you can better it, how you can improve it. Out of the reality that you see on the screen, we created the space that potential of the fact that nobody at the beginning of this work believes that we can find even single spare part that would be authentic, that would be original. because 60s, 70s, 80s were the years where authenticity, historicity, where this originality was being touched up, painted over, whitewashed. These are the walls, how they used to look before, but these are the very same walls that you witnessed with your own eyes in the course of our workshop last week, and we managed to restore them. We managed to trace the memory in these walls. Another important and interesting thing that I need to mention are the people who were helping us from the outside, who were helping us in our quest for authenticity. We are not talking about historical figures. We are talking about neighbors, chance neighbors, chance walkers, remembering what was taken out of this house, who took it, where did they take it, and so on and so forth, whom we should have addressed in order to bring stuff back. Another thing that I want to talk about is traditional Thursday day that used to be a tradition in Ilia Chavchavadze's time as well. Meetings on Thursdays, readings about democracy, they used to call it. And we are talking about continuation of our historical road, historical way. I can bring you facts. Think back to 19th century Georgia. We do not have all the communication means that we've got at our disposal today, mobile phones, messages, whatever. And these people still know that every Thursday evening, they can turn up at Ilia Chavchavadze's house. People that might not be liking each other much, that might not be agreeing, that might be even at daggers politically, but still they can all gather there and discuss. And quite often, the outcome might have been regretful because people would stop talking to each other, maybe following the discussions. But till the very day of the murder of Ilia Chavchavadze in 1907, this tradition went on for 8 years before his death, and his whole life before that, but especially the last 8 years of his life. He was very, very vocal in press of the time, in parliamentary bodies of that time. He was vouching for abolishment of lethal punishment. We are talking about 1904, 1905, 1906. This Thursday political evenings was one of the main values that we were trying to reflect in our museum space, and till now, we actually organized 65 Thursday democracy readings, even against the background of very harsh polarization that our society is witnessing in the recent years. What was weird about it, what was strange about this, not the fact that we were organizing democracy readings on Thursdays, but the surprise that our guests were expressing about our preparedness to lend our ears to differing opinions, our readiness, our preparedness to hear them out, even if they never had any spaces to express themselves before.
ხუთშაბათობის ტრადიცია, როდესაც ძალიან ხშირად არავის არ ჭეროდა იმისა, რომ შეგვეძლოთ ამამად დაგვეთმოს სივრცე იმისთვის, რომ გვესაუბრა რადიკალურ პოზიციებზე. გვესაუბრა განსაკუთრებულად ისეთ საკითხებზე, როგორც არის ადამიანის უფლებები, როგორც არის კლიმატის უფლებები და გვესაუბრა მათ შორის ისეთ უფლებებზე, როგორც არის უმცირესობის პრობლემები, სხვადასხვა თემის პრობლემები და ასე შემდეგ და ასე შემდეგ. მე მჯერა და ჩვენ გავაგრძელებთ ჩვენი ვალდებულებებისა და პასუხისმგებლობის გზას. გავაგრძელებთ იმ ღირებულებების ერთგულებას, რომელსაც ადამიანის უფლებები ქვია და გავაგრძელებთ ძალადობის დაგმობას, გავაგრძელებთ ილია ჭავჭავაძისა და მერაბ კოსტავას გზას და შევძლებთ ვიცხოვროთ იმ დემოკრატიული ფასეულობებით, რომელსაც მუზეუმები უნდა ინახავდნენ და ავრცელებდნენ. მე ძალიან დიდ ხანს შემიძლია ვისაუბრო თბილისის მუზეუმების გაერთიანების ამოცანებზე, მაგრამ ძალიან დიდ მადლობას გიხდით თითოეულ თქვენთაგან შესაძლებლობებისთვის და მზად ვარ დეტალური კითხვებისთვის.